Não. Bom, boa noite a todas e todos. Estamos aqui com mais um DigiLabour Conversations. Hoje é o quarto encontro nosso. DigiLabour Conversations é uma iniciativa da newsletter DigiLabour e do programa de pós-graduação em Ciências da Comunicação da Universidade do Vale do Rio dos Sinos, a Unicinos. E hoje temos aqui para conversar com a gente a Cheryll Soriano, que é a professora da Universidade de La Salle, em Manila, nas Filipinas, e vai conversar com a gente sobre o trabalho digital, os imaginários do trabalho digital no Sul Global. Cheryll, thank you very much again, and 1 minute. Okay. It's a great pleasure having us today for us and tonight for today for you and tonight for us. And you have 30 minutes to your presentation, and then you answer our questions.
All right, thanks very much. All right, thanks very much, Rafael. Good evening to everyone in Brazil and to Rafael as well. And good day to everyone joining us, perhaps in other parts of the world. So I hope you're all managing well during this challenging times. So first, I just wanted to thank Rafael for pushing through with this conference. I've been tuning into the previous discussions and they're quite fruitful. So I think I'm gonna move on and talk about our paper. Right, so I hope that is sharing, the slide is sharing well. All right, so I'm sharing our work on digital labor imaginaries in the Global South. This is a product of collaboration with some of my colleagues, Jason Cabañas, Jeremy Tintianco, and also Joy Panaligan from De La Salle University. And really in the discussions later, I'm very excited to hear about how perhaps these imaginaries might also resonate with some of the experiences that some of the researchers in this group might have found in other parts of the world. So I'll begin with the idea that globally, around 70 million registered digital workers are now obtaining gigs from digital labor platforms like Upwork or onlinejobs.ph or freelancer.com. And research on digital labor in the Global South have pointed out about the precarious conditions of the workers in these platforms. And sometimes the label that the literature would put in this is called digital sweatshops, right? And we do agree and observe, as we found in our research, that digital labor exposes workers to different kinds of exploitation and self-exploitation. So first is labor arbitrage, where clients can buy labor at its cheapest, and given a slew of workers that they can choose from in the labor platforms, they can choose to buy it when the price is the cheapest. This also means that there is seasonality of labor demand because the control is primarily from the client side. So workers would tell us that sometimes there will be a lot of work in the platform, but there will also be times when there's just no work available. And so they will sometimes overcompensate when there's a lot of labor, right? And the third is that given the promotion that government is giving for online jobs or online freelancing, there is now an oversupply of workers and continually increasing competition, leading some of the workers, especially the new aspirants, to underprice. So they will sometimes agree to say $2 per hour or $3 per hour for work that is relatively more complicated in relation to that amount. And also there's absence of security benefits. So platform work typically is characterized by the absence of mandated non-wage benefits like health insurance, paid leave, or even retrenchment benefits. And finally, it's the platformization of labor leads workers generally to be powerless in relation to the platform. So different platforms impose different fee cuts per transaction. And sometimes they would liberally increase this without really much control by the workers. So for example, recently Upwork required their users to join Facebook Connect. And so some of the premium paying clients can automatically access the workers' Facebook profiles or accounts, for example. Some of the workers also share their gripes towards unfair account suspensions that they cannot really do much about. And also similar to Uber or Grab, For example, clients can rate workers on the basis of each project and portfolio. And this in turn determines a worker's chances of getting hired again in the future. But having said this, so much of the literature, and also we agree that there is precarity that's taking place in the platforms, but juxtaposed to that is a very positive framing or discourses of the government in relation to online platform labor. And so kind of going beyond the two narratives of over-optimism, but also pessimism, we felt perhaps we have to listen to the workers and take on from the perspectives of these workers, and try to also understand and situate this in the context of Philippine post-coloniality and class conditions. And so beyond seeing digital labor as a mere response to unemployment or underemployment, perhaps we can draw from a situated social, cultural, and economic complexities, also from colonial history and past labor regimes, and specifically the current experiences of workers to understand why they're attracted to this form of labor, even when literature says about the precarious conditions surrounding it. And so we build on some of the literature on labor and precarity in the Global South, which forcefully argue to counterbalance the tendency of scholarship, to confer an aura of newness to the precarity that laborers in the Global South experience. So here I'm pertaining to Ronaldo Monk, an Argentinian scholar, who argues that in the context of the Global South, precarity has been the always ready condition of workers. And I believe Rafael and also Jack have alluded to this argument as well in their recently published fantastic piece. So in short, many of the conditions experienced by workers in platform labor are also experienced in local labor context, and sometimes with even much worse conditions. So apart from online platform workers, there are many in the Philippines, and I guess in the rest of the Global South, who belong to the informal economy, who obtain various gigs in their everyday lives as food or mobile phone load, prepaid load sellers in variety stores, or sometimes casual workers in grocery stores, or public transportation, forth. And in comparison to these conditions of work, sometimes workers would see this work as actually more palatable. And so over the past 3 years, our project has been examining first, platform workers' imaginaries, or here we look at the platform, how platform workers describe and also create value of their digital labor experiences, but also how they describe their future aspirations or goals in job. And then while we look at historically the labor conditions in the country, we also look at the emerging structure supporting digital labor, specifically any emerging local intermediaries. So sometimes we call them coaches, brokers, or influencers, but also the emerging power differences or asymmetries amongst these workers, but also between workers and platforms. So in short, what I'm trying to say here is that in the course of our research, we found that some workers indeed become very successful. They become agencies, right? And the third is that we wanted to know the extent by which workers recognize and thrive against the challenges posed by the platform. And so we're looking at emerging forms of resistance, but also solidarity to challenge the abusive conditions of digital labor. I will mostly be focusing on the first one, but I will also refer to the second and the third as they connect to the first. And so first, just a little bit of a background in case I know many of us are familiar with digital labor, but just in case some are not very familiar. So here's an example of an online labor platform, Upwork, right? So Upwork is a platform that matches a client normally based in the global north to a worker normally based in the global south. So it says here, find your perfect freelancer, right? So of course, some of the workers can be located in different parts of the world, but available statistics show that much of the labor supply comes from the global south. So here's another example of a platform, onlinejobs.ph. It used to recruit workers from all parts of the world, but eventually focused only on recruiting Filipino workers, connecting them to global employers. So in the landing of the platform, it says it's a marketplace for finding rock star Filipino workers. the other poster there says Rockstar Filipino platforms for a very cheap price, right? And so this is a funny slide because when I got this when I was first doing research, and I was surprised at how many academic jobs were in fact available in the online platform. So here is freelancer.com. But I just wanted to say here that the kind of work obtained in these platforms cover a very broad range. They range from transcription to content moderation to search engine optimization that might not command very high rates, up to applications development, software development, even sometimes engineering that command much higher rates for the workers. However, studies show, and also our personal research shows, that much of the Filipinos are involved in virtual assistant work. So this is like taking the role of an overall assistant or secretary for online secretary for a foreign client to do various kinds of things, from booking flights, scheduling meetings, scheduling dinners, etc., etc. So we will now go on the Philippines. Ranked as having the worst unemployment rates in Asia, but with a large English-speaking population, the Philippines, alongside India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, is now one of the largest workers supplying labor in these labor platforms. Well, but at least globally, it's also been one of the prime sites of BPO work, like call center work as well. So the Philippine government has been championing digital labor as a way to overcome unemployment woes faced by Filipinos. And the government sees platform labor as a complement to other forms of BPO work, an alternative to labor overseas migration. As we know, many Filipinos are in different parts of the world doing various kinds of jobs, a catalyst for urban and rural development, and an attractive option for young graduates. So Payoneer data also shows the Philippines to be the 5th fastest growing gig economy. So you can see Brazil there as the 3rd, apparently, from Payoneer. So Payoneer is a platform payment system. And so I'll go now to the findings of our research. So in our project, we pay particular attention to the contradictory experiences that platform laborers in the Philippines have as regards precarization. So in this paper, Between World-Class Work and Proletarianized Labor, that I co-wrote with my colleague Jason Cabañas, we present digital labor imaginaries of workers in the Philippines that are rooted in the meanings that workers ascribe to their working engagements. And we argue that the effective elements of digital labor may perhaps be understood through the entwined imaginaries of class and coloniality. So here we define class beyond the narrow concept of the economic through the broader lens of the social. We also acknowledge its post-colonial consciousness that pertains to how subjects possess a history and a way of being that resists or subverts being entirely defined by coloniality and capital as well. I guess what makes the precariousness and marginal middle classness of digital labor in the Philippines distinct is what might appear to be a kind of a jobs mismatch that predominate this kind of work, which is often considered as low prestige if looking from the global north perspective. So this labor is comprised primarily of offshored low-skilled occupations, some of them at least, being taken up by the country's educated workforce. Yet, for many Filipinos who do digital labor, the class imaginary of marginal middle classness runs alongside a more positive colonial imaginary of being a global worker. So the workers see themselves as holding not just any white-collar job, but one that is linked to the global flow of industries and as such, also to a global lifestyle. So these workers also appreciate how their jobs, so many of them were previous call workers who have moved to platform labor to avoid night shifts, long working hours, or getting the brunt of customer complaints every single day, also horrible traffic conditions, that afford them access to some of the perceived markers of global middle class lifestyle, such as buying a car, or buying a house, or wearing fashionable clothes, or getting cafe and Starbucks. So these are middle class luxuries that kind of mark some of their aspirations as well. And it is in this context that we emphasize that any analysis, perhaps, of the conditions of platform workers in the Global South must situate existing work conditions against these available alternatives that sometimes pose often worse conditions, and which many of the workers also actively, continually weigh and assess. So they don't have, it's not like they don't think about this, it's because they have no choice. They actually have a choice, except that the other choices that are available are actually not more palatable anyway. And so drawing from our in-depth talking with workers for over 3 years and also joining several online freelance gatherings, both physically and online, we present 3 entwined imaginaries, that of distinction, transcendence, and flexibility. So I'll begin with distinction. One key classed and colonial imaginary of online freelance workers we interviewed was that of distinction. This pertained to their belief in the exceptionality of Filipinos when it came to skilled global service work. So they situated themselves within the long history of their compatriots fulfilling labor shortages throughout the world as nurses or caregivers, as domestic workers, or as seafarers, for example. They saw themselves, though, as a special class of workers who possess distinct traits that match the requirements of digital labor as world-class service workers. Crucially, they often articulated this idea in comparison as well to competitor countries. And the majority of workers we interviewed talked about having a distinct suite of skills attractive to the digital economy, which included English proficiency, digital literacy, a willingness to serve, and also an entrepreneurial spirit. So if you look at the second quote here in the slide, it says, "We Filipinos, we are hardworking, we don't complain much. We complain about different things, but not to the foreign client. Also, we are willing to do overtime to please a client. This, I think, is what makes us preferred workers." Interestingly, because this was said to me in a quite positive sense, but one can also read this as somewhat a justification of self-exploitation. Second, the continuity from BPO or call center work and online freelance work also added to this imaginary distinction. So as a former call center agent shared, it is about the experiences of talking to foreign people and of course the customer service culture that serves them well and allows them to thrive in this economy. And so they feel that they have a good chance of thriving in online freelancing because they already possess particular skills that have been honed through years of BPO work. So this imaginary of distinction is in key ways also driven by how the Philippine government has used labor brokerage as one of its neoliberal strategies to bring in much needed currency inflows over the past years. The government has actively branded the nation as one that systematically trains and exports service workers for the global market. And this is predominantly constructed as a natural global order of things that Filipinos should accede to and even benefit from. So in the last decades, the Philippine government has continually touted the mantra of Filipinos being world-class service workers and modern heroes, so attributing the label of hero to these workers, helping drive labor export, sometimes despite the precariousness associated with such work. Digital labor has also been envisioned to address unemployment and rural development in the country. The label of modern hero that has been attributed to overseas Filipino workers, so you see that acronym OFW, overseas Filipino workers, is now also attributed to online Filipino or freelance workers, but now with a 2.0. So they're now OFW 2.0. This is because through digital labor, one still earns much needed dollars and performs as a global worker, works with a global client, only this time without having to be away from home. So clearly then, articulating the characteristics of distinction enables the fashioning and nation branding of Filipino online freelancers as highly valuable and competitive world-class workers. At the same time, however, it seems to construct Filipino subjects not only as a global commodity, but also as, again, a colonized subject. I'll now move on to the second imaginary, which is also classed and colonial imaginary, is that of transcendence. Many of them subscribe to the idea that having to overcome difficulties was not only demonstrative of their positive qualities as a digital worker, but is also crucial to their overall self-development. So contemporaneous with modern capitalist thought, the freelance workers saw the experience of what Kovacs calls transcendence, triumphing over tough work conditions, not only as a means to career success, but also as a form of self-realization, as human self-fulfillment and development. Well, unfortunately, this belief can also be co-opted as self-exploitation, which is about this internalized feeling or belief that in order to be competitive and attain success, one should be able to tolerate low pay now that may not be commensurate to the effort and to the skills, and to work conditions that may be unfair because of the promise that I can transcend this and I can become successful only if I work hard. So the imaginary of transcendence of the freelance workers also seem to be tied to wanting to move away from a Filipino colonial experience of being stereotyped then by our colonial masters as indolent, right? So the workers wanted to show that above other workers from other countries, they're not lazy. They could turn in high quality work, even in the most trying of circumstances. What further reinforces this thinking is a culture of audit and accountability in the platforms crystallized in the rating systems that enable workers and that enable employers to give feedback to the freelancer service. And so if I do not perform so hard now, I can be rated as low, and the chances of me getting another job or another project in the future will be lower. And so the freelance workers often express the imaginary of transcendence by building a resilience-based reputation. In reality, however, working hard and earning a reputation did not really give workers full control, as they still had to deal with structural limits of labor arbitrage or constraints of labor oversupply. Certain workers who manage to take advantage of reputational capital are able to secure the trust of local clients and therefore really transcend their conditions. So the successful workers become agencies. I'm not sure if some of you have encountered this. So they will take a large chunk of a project because they are now trusted. It's a big project with a high rate. And then they will now farm this out to friends, sometimes even to neighbors. And quite interestingly, we saw a particular neighborhood where one person has given a job to her husband, to her mother, her sister, and brothers, and the entire neighborhood through online freelancing because she has become an agency already, right? So a kind of a transcendence is moving from your single fulfillment to being able to give jobs to your neighborhoods, and they kind of get a good sense or feeling of that capacity to be able to help and create jobs for other people. And transcendence is visualized, especially here comes in the role of Facebook groups, right? So they would visualize their successes of transcending hard work, right? So working hard and being able to achieve things, but also the capacity to buy things. And so katas ng freelancing is like fruits of freelancing, where they will post pictures of the new house that they managed to build, or a new car that they managed to buy, or I was a factory worker, now I am this and I'm earning this amount of money, or finally I'm now able to send my child to private schools, right? Or I'm able to give jobs to my neighbors and to my friends, right? So this reinforces a dynamic that made the workers feel that the drive for self-improvement and social mobility were in line with what was deemed desirable by global capital, to be able to accumulate and buy things and provide for material needs of your community. In turn, this resilient mindset also makes them sometimes, however, susceptible to exploitation and self-exploitation, leading them to put in extra hours with the imagination that later on, the fruits of their hard work will pay off. And often this is an idea sold by the successful people, the agencies, the coaches, the trainers, the influencers, which is not a kind of a success that's experienced by many other workers, specifically the newer ones just joining the pool. So it's kind of a false aspiration for some, but an actualized aspiration for others. And finally, the last imaginary is flexibility. So online Filipino freelance workers also articulated the class and colonial imaginary of flexibility. For many of the workers we interviewed, their job brought into focus how they were connected to the infrastructures of global connectivity that drove labor platforms where they worked. It also highlighted that we're able to find ways of avoiding infrastructure immobilities that mark Philippine urban conditions, traffic that's very heavy, bad roads, inefficient public transport. So I talked to a worker who used to work in a call center, and it would take her over 2 hours to travel one way. And so to weigh, that would be over 4 hours plus working itself. This would lead her to have not capable of giving quality time for her family. So for her, the flexibility that this kind of a work affords her is something that she finds valuable. Online freelancing also made the workers rethink their standards of good work, since they had experienced digital work as a site for negotiating flexibility and the attractive fluidity of work, leisure, and care spaces. So this is captured in the first two photos. You can beautify your workspace, or you can work alongside your kids, specifically for mothers or for women who have taken on this as a personal option to be able to look after their kids as they are growing up. The imaginary of flexibility also encompassed imaginaries of limitless social mobility. So the idea that the more I work hard, the greater the success, also because I can take on as many projects as I like, and I can earn from every single one of them. Unlike I think we know this, right? So if you are in a full-time job, sometimes your boss may dump you extra work, but your pay actually does not increase. So these workers would tell me, that was my job before. My boss will keep adding work and then my pay is fixed. But here, whenever I take on a project, I will get paid for every single of them. So if I want to become successful, I will just do so many projects. The downside of this, however, as some of the workers we notice is that some of them will get sleep deprived. They will encounter some health issues in relation to sometimes not being able to be too mobile anymore because of the addiction to the idea that you can continually work and become earning higher and higher. Also, the idea that I can move from one job to another if one job is not very popular anymore in the market. I can just learn on the go, maybe from YouTube or maybe from a coach, and I can hop from one job to another. There is that kind of a flexibility that's being offered by the influencers, but also shared by the workers amongst themselves. So the interesting aspect with imaginaries of flexibility was that it could be negotiated depending on what the worker values or ascribed importance. And this could be about diversifying the nature of work, expanding one's earning capacity, or designing one's office space as a leisure space, or having more travel opportunities, so working while on the beach, for example, or spending more time with the family. So in sum, I argue that to view these online freelance workers as mere victims implies positioning them within a simplistic interpretive narrative or framework of either just oppression or resistance to normative structures and discursive constructions. I guess in fleshing out these imaginaries, we highlight the motivations, meanings, but also the values that digital workers ascribe to their jobs, as well as the role of online communities and also influencers in helping push these imaginaries across the workers. In exploring digital labor in the context of its social, political, and cultural embeddedness, I aim to show how workers constituted a sense of self and agency. But these aspirations and sense of self and agency can be fraught at best and sometimes even false at worst. The imaginaries of this specific subgroup of workers articulate an assemblage of class and colonial perspectives of agency and aspirations created by the digital economy. And so I'll close with what are the implications of this. So it's a good thing that we see the pride and the rationalization that workers have of their work. However, it may also appear to neutralize the challenging conditions and the risks and abuses associated with platform labor conditions that workers just navigate by themselves. And in relation to the second one, where government and also the labor platforms kind of elide their responsibilities in addressing the structural conditions. So yes, they create jobs for the government and improves the statistics. Yes, they satisfy their clients and create profit for the platforms, but who is really looking after the welfare of the workers apart from themselves, sharing solidarity with each other, which leads us to the third one. So the kinds of solidarities emerging are also often anchored on these imaginaries. So in another article, it's being finalized for social media and society. Jason Cabañas and I pertain to this as entrepreneurial solidarities. So they help each other game the system that also games on them, albeit on their own, but they do not seem to be mobilizing to demand for crucial structural reforms in the local labor economy and also in the platform labor economy itself. I think I'll end there, Rafael. I look forward to your questions and also to learning about your experiences as well.
Thank you very much, Cheryll. It was excellent. Well, questions? I have one.
Yes.
Gente, se vocês quiserem perguntar, só colocar aí a pergunta no chat que a gente faz para Cheryll. My first question is, could you talk a little bit about skill makers in Manila economy?
Yes, thanks for that, Rafael. Right, so platform labor is a very ambiguous labor environment, right? So if we have a regular job, say we will have an HR, a human resources, right? And human resources prepares us for the job responsibilities, what work will entail, how to get promoted. Also, it briefs us of what our salary would be, and the salary would often be fixed, right? In platform labor, there are a lot of ambiguities that are involved. These ambiguities would range from, first, how do I create a portfolio that will be attractive to a foreign client? Second, how do I price myself? What is the proper rate? Third, what is the platform that I can trust? Fourth, what is a worker or a client that I can trust? Can I trust all the clients? What if some of them are scammers? Fifth, how do I create a good relationship with my client so that I can get a good star or a rating? And so because the work of the government is really matching, helping workers, so they're promoting platform labor, but when you get into this and you get hooked and interested, there's really not much help you can get anymore apart from the skill makers. And so these are former platform workers. They're also still platform workers, but who have achieved some level of success. And so they have taken on this role or a job as coaches, or we call them skill makers in another article, wherein they sell the coaching or the idea of how freelance workers can become successful, work around the platforms, learn some skills. So they teach them not just tangible skills, but also some kind of a capacity to build relationships with the client. So, for example, some of the workers will ask them, so can I ask for a raise? And do you think, can it become possible for me to ask for a raise? So from very basic skills to also those kinds of skills of navigating the client, navigating the platform, etc.
Okay, the next question from David Garcia. David, thanks so much for the fantastic presentation. Soriano, I would like to know how the work arrangements have changed given the pandemic. Also, did the pandemic cause more organizing for structural change? David Garcia is a map maker from the Philippines, PhD student in New Zealand.
Hello, David. So thanks for that question. It's a very important question to think about. How is the pandemic changing the nature of arrangements for digital labor in the Philippines? So I can see two different kinds of things. So one is that freelance workers themselves are affected by the pandemic, with clients that are mostly located globally, but also globally, companies are also shutting down. Specifically, small to medium enterprises are also closing down. So I saw in some of the Facebook communities that some of the workers would share that the clients are also closing their jobs, and so therefore they have communicated that they can no longer continually contract them. However, these groups, these freelancers are also kind of mobilizing or coming together. So I saw in one Facebook community of freelancers where they are documenting. So they put, there was a post, okay, please write who among you have been affected by the pandemic, because we are collating a list of clients who may have some work, even sometimes just local clients who may be able to contract you and help you. And also because some of the workers, as I mentioned, may have larger kinds of jobs that they can maybe parcel on to these workers. But this is happening primarily just within the community. So there's that kind of a mobilization from within to help freelancers. But at the same time, there's also a kind of mobilization that's happening amongst freelance workers. I can see that in the communities as well, trying to help other kinds of workers. I think this is where the kind of a sense of informality is relatable to these freelance workers. So I saw them mobilizing to help grocery workers and all the other kinds of informal workers that are affected also by the pandemic. And then the third one is the attention on generally digital workers, BPO workers. So there's a current feature advanced by the group Bien about the really horrible conditions experienced by call center workers. It's already taken up by an Australian news media, where they are compelled to go into the physical offices, but they practically sleep there. The work conditions is not actually very good, but they had to continually do it even during the pandemic from those spaces that are normally cramped. So they will sleep on the floor, et cetera, without much protection. Right.
Okay. The next question is mine again. What are the potentials and the limits of these collective solidarities you call about entrepreneurial solidarities?
Yeah. On the one hand, entrepreneurial solidarities are helping the workers be able to cope with the conditions of the platform environment, right? So they're in these kinds of solidarities, they share their experiences, they share their techniques of surviving in this environment. And so that is a good thing. The challenge, however, is because the tendency is to share how to survive in the system, but there's not much about challenging the conditions that led them to this in the first place, challenging the features of the platform. So why is Upwork doing this? So why is Upwork doing this? Okay, let's look for another platform instead of being able to push for changes in the platform, for example. However, we're also seeing some interesting developments. So we saw a particular form of solidarity building. There is an alternative labor platform that is being created. So we just found this out recently in a field work where this is called Wrap Up. We found it in one of the islands in the country, where platform workers have come together to create a local platform that is kind of following more of the kind of a fair game for the workers. They also kind of identify a particular savings that workers can automatically save, so that this protects them from labor seasonality when they will have no jobs in the future. But this platform that they created kind of saves clients and also does not charge workers for cuts like Upwork or other platforms do. However, because really it's very hard to compete with the credibility but also the popularity of platforms like Upwork and Freelancer.com or GoLance. And so even when this is an alternative, it really still has very limited popularity and reach amongst the freelance workers. And the last variation of this is a cooperative, right? So there's no union yet, but there is a cooperative now that's emerging. And the cooperative is helping workers kind of have the idea of some sense of financial security. And so they provide different kinds of trainings and some kinds of help, but they're also kind of training freelance workers to be able to save for conditions that will lead them to precarious conditions, again, in the context of labor seasonality, right? But as I was saying earlier, these are more of helping each other survive the difficult conditions, but not really to kind of push a punch on why is the labor condition in the Philippines like this at all, that makes this kind of a working condition palatable for many of these workers to start with.
Okay, next question from Danielle Marques from Brazil. Are gig workers normally aware of data practices from digital work platforms? Do they have a general understanding of how personal data is being used by these platforms?
Only to a certain extent, I believe, right? So the workers are very familiar that for every job that they perform, they are rated in the platform by their clients, and these ratings appear, right? But for example, some of the other features, for example, if what I was mentioning earlier in Upwork, in Connects, right? So if a client pays premium, the client can see can get access to the workers' Facebook accounts automatically. And so some of the workers know this, but how platforms learn and work on the data that's aggregated across workers, for example, I do not think this is something that workers are conscious about. I do not think that the workers are aware of how this data can be used for them, perhaps in terms of tactical pricing or strategizing of the platforms, for example, right? So their awareness is kind of in a limited sense in terms of understanding that their profiles or their portfolios is being reviewed by every single client that's looking for a potential worker to hire.
Okay, next question from Marcel Maia from Brazil, from University of São Paulo. How do Imaginaries relate to gender issues?
Oh yeah, did I get it right? Gender issues, right?
Gender, yeah.
Yes, yeah. I like this question. It makes me think a lot because I haven't really written much on gender, but as I mentioned earlier, I think crucial here are the tropes of transcendence and also flexibility. On flexibility, is that it's very apparent that many of the workers who've moved to platform labor are women who are coming from call center work. And this is because call center work has become very difficult for mothers who are rearing children, but who have to come home just at the time when the kids are going ready for school, right? And so the aspiration of having a flexible kind of a work life where you can continually work. So quite interestingly, I saw in one of the Facebook groups, someone just gave birth, and she was actually very happy to say that, look, because of online freelancing, I just gave birth, but I can work already. And then all the other mothers were kind of praising that. I was like, whoa, already working, right? I just gave birth. But she was alluding to the idea that in this kind of a job, you can do the work wherever you are, and it kind of allows mothering to be happening simultaneously with being economically productive. How one will interpret that, because it actually can create a double burden for women. But for many of the workers, they see this as a kind of a gratification, a positive feeling about the self that I'm economically productive while at the same time being able to effectively care for my family and see my son grow up. I'm working, and some of them will share kind of ambient in Facebook groups. Their kids are on their lap, sometimes on the table as they work, right? And many of these are actually women. So I guess in terms of the aspirations for flexibility, the gendered aspect of it, this is really very still much connected to the norm of mothering, caring, being able to care for the family while becoming economically productive. And that is in a way connected to transcendence. So it's not just your personal self-fulfillment of having a job, but where self-fulfillment is very much associated to one's capacity to be able to care for your family, for other people, because this is the entrenched norm for you as a woman, for example. And very interestingly as well, so this makes me think, how about the men, right? So similarly as well, though, the role of men being continually providers for the family through online platform labor is also kind of coming out. I would like to think a little bit more about this, but quite interestingly, the way men would kind of converge in online platforms as well is interesting. They will drink together and have their inuman. So there is a Facebook group called Freelancer Dads, where they will share their tactics and techniques in online freelancing while drinking, right? And so I felt that the gender tropes are kind of carried forward in the way these workers will kind of also converge together and share their imaginaries of work in this industry.
Okay, thanks. The next question from Olga from Rio de Janeiro. What are the characteristics of the clients? Are they small entrepreneurs? Also, in your research, did you have the chance to interview a freelancer that became an entrepreneur and is using the work of freelancers?
Yes, yeah, thanks for that question. We haven't had a chance to really speak to the clients. I think this will be a nice opportunity to move into that direction later on. But based on our conversation with freelance workers, indeed, many of the clients are kind of more in the small to medium kinds of enterprises, right? So the clients are also they're not very large businesses. And that's why, in relation to the question earlier on COVID, the employers as well and their small companies are also very much affected by the pandemic as well, right? But also at the same time, this means that they also perhaps are still navigating with the platform, particularly because of the condition that they're not very large enterprises, because if they're large enterprises, they will have perhaps human resources and all those other kinds of resources that are available for the company. So this means that workers here are also working with many of the clients that are relatively small to medium in size. And workers who have become entrepreneurs. So the first is that some of the workers really do consider themselves entrepreneurs, right? So in short, they brand themselves as not just a regular worker. I'm an entrepreneur because if I label myself as a worker, I will have the mindset of just finishing a job, right? But if you are an entrepreneur, you have an idea that you are actually selling yourself as the business, right? But if we are to take this in a literal sense, there also are workers who have really transcended the labor class into becoming entrepreneurs in the sense that they have built agencies, as I was mentioning earlier. So some of them no longer perform work in the platform. What they do is that because of the reputation that they have managed to build, they're kind of become entrepreneurs who outsource these jobs to their friends or to other people also in the platform. So when you have become very big, you will move from outsourcing the smaller jobs to your family or your friends or your neighbors to you will now post your job and cascade it to other freelance workers as well, whether in the Facebook group or in some local labor platforms, right? And so in a sense, this kind of takes in an entrepreneurial mindset. And this is a kind of an aspiration. So many of the workers whom we interviewed, what do you want to become? What is your vision of success? And many of them would say that our vision of success is really becoming an agency, being able to create jobs for other people, but also becoming financially sustainable. So I am no longer dependent, kind of oh, what if I don't have another job anymore? So constantly looking for projects. So moving away from that feeling of having to constantly look for projects, but having a sustainable kind of set of loyal clients that are large enough that can make them be confidently able to cascade it to other kinds of workers.
Thanks. The last question from Dali Johanna Sanchez Vargas, de Colombia. Very interesting and engaging presentation. My question is in regard to regulation and formalization of these workers. You may have mentioned it, but it's not clear how government in Philippines have attempted to regulate these contemporary workers.
Yes, that is a very important question, right, that we're grappling with right now. So this is how it goes in the Philippines. When platform labor started in the scene, the agency really handling its promotion is the Department of Information and Communication Technology. Interestingly, right? Not the labor or employment agency. And so the Department of Information and Communication Technology was tapped by the presidency to kind of create jobs through ICT. And so they actually invited or collaborated with the platforms to sell these jobs, kind of promote these jobs into the rural countryside. So let's create jobs using ICT through platforms. And because some of the companies might not want to invest physically in the rural countryside because it's very expensive to invest in the countryside, right? But here there's not much investment, but workers can get a job and we get good statistics in terms of job creation. But the problem is that what happens after that, right? So you have promoted it, people have aspirations that they can take on their jobs, and some of them really have started to take on jobs, but sometimes at very, very low rates. This is where regulation becomes absent, right? And so even in my conversations with people from the Department of Labor and Employment, and also in my research on some of the policy documents, this is really not very much still in their radar, right? So they are preparing for it, but there's really not much regulation in terms of protecting workers in this regard. So therefore, what I'm trying to say is that there is a clear mismatch. So it's the ICT agency that is driving the popularity of this kind of a labor, but there is no agency even looking at what are the conditions of the workers in these platforms and what kinds of policies or regulation can we come up to be able to help these workers. Many of the workers we've talked to have experienced some health conditions. Some of them would say, oh, I will not go out for several days. I interviewed a worker who has gained 100 pounds from online freelancing. So some will say this is trivial or this is anecdotal. But in focus group discussions, they will all say, yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm not sure if I am ready to talk to other people anymore. And so there perhaps are mentally even health conditions that need to be monitored. But this is very hard to take place. Any intervention is very hard to take place when there is no one really monitoring the conditions of these workers. The second one is in relation to taxation, right? And so there is now a mechanism to help freelance workers be recognized and to pay taxes. But freelancers themselves kind of have an ambivalent feeling about this. So why will I pay taxes if the government really does not do or is not really doing anything for me? So some of them are compelled to pay taxes and to register simply because they cannot travel outside and get a passport. Sometimes it asks for your tax return, so they have no choice. But for others, they feel like, oh, I don't have anything to do with the government, and even if I pay the tax, I will not benefit from it anyway. So why do so? And so there's this really, I feel, attention from the government beyond being able to create jobs. And this is very much related to the imaginary, the vision that this is a good thing, we're creating so many jobs. But what kind of jobs? What are the conditions of the workers in these jobs? And how can we help support them to become more viable, to be more confident in bargaining for rates? How do we talk to platforms so that they become more fair and do not suddenly just increase rates, suddenly charge you for bidding for so and so number of projects, for not paying you when your client becomes a scammer and does not pay you? So how do we safeguard the conditions of the workers? We need to have more conversations with this at the policy level, I feel. And yes, I guess this is an important direction to take further on in the research, kind of the policy aspect in this regard.
Okay. Thank you so much, dear Cheryll. Thank you for your amazing presentation. And I see you on our panel at the Association of Internet Researchers, virtual presentation. Fingers crossed.
Thanks very much, Rafael. Thanks very much, everyone, for your wonderful questions.
Thank you. Gente, na semana que vem, muito obrigado a todos pela presença. Na semana que vem, a gente vai receber o professor James Steinhoff, da Universidade de Washington, e ele vai falar sobre autonomia ou automação, o trabalho digital na indústria de machine learning. Ele é coautor do livro In Human Power, em coautoria com Nick Dyer Rutherford. Na semana que vem, na segunda-feira, às 6 horas da tarde, às 18 horas, no horário brasileiro. Thank you again, Cheryll. See you.
Thank you very much.
Stay healthy.
Bye. Good night.
Good day for you.